Recognizing the member for Cariboo North.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It truly is a pleasure and an honour to rise today to speak on behalf of the constituents of Cariboo North. Madam Speaker, sometimes I sit in this House and I listen to the members of the NDP government and I feel that we are absolutely in a different universe. For the Minister of Forests to stand up in this House and talk about how rosy and how great everything is in the province of British Columbia, how you have workers' backs and how you're putting all these things forward, when at 4:50 a.m. 700 workers in the province of British Columbia just received temporary layoff notices. Madam Speaker, where is the money that, through you to the minister, where is the money to support those families? Where is the money to support those workers? You know, I've heard, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Forests stand in this House on multiple occasions and talk about how, and she even said today, the potential impacts that could happen, that they are strategically aligning all of these supports for people in the forest economy. And yet here today, just moments ago, as I get off the phone talking to workers, talking to families impacted, I hear from this minister all of the great grandiose things that will be done. I would like to see, through you, Madam Speaker, to this government action. I want to see how the money in this budget that she just announced is going to get into the hands of people in my community, in communities right across this province, for those 700 workers that have just been impacted less than a half an hour ago before the minister gets up and delivers a speech. I want to know where people will find the supports that this government repeatedly says that they have your back. Where are those supports? Where are those supports? The minister stands up and talks about this grand new vision for the wildfire service. How disrespectful to the people of the Cariboo Wildfire Service, to the Blackwater crew that have been working year after year, year-round, to make sure that they're fire-smarting our communities, to make sure that they're making investments, whether they're doing the rehabilitative work in Barkerville, whether they're making sure they're doing these investments. They come up, they make these announcements that these are new investments, we're doing this new grand scale. Well, look, people on the ground have been doing this work. And for the government to stand here in this House and say this is somehow new, that we're making new investments, it's disrespectful for the people that are in our communities that are working hard every single day. Madam Speaker, sometimes I sit in this legislature and I listen to the NDP and I cannot help but feel the very real distance and disconnect that this government has to the people living in my riding. The people living in rural British Columbia. In reality, this distance feels as vast as the true distance, the geographic distance that forms the reality for people living across the province of British Columbia. In reviewing a history of British Columbia and interviewing and listening to our elders, our pioneers, our builders, our volunteers, our community champions, it is the incredible, unique diversity of our province and our people that is our legacy and our foundation for our path forward. We cannot and we will not succeed as a province or as British Columbians unless we understand this geographic vastness of our province and our unique community circumstances and the needs of all people in our province. And it cannot and it should not be ignored. I want to start, of course, by recognizing the support of my family and the incredible staff that I know are watching back home, and I want you to sincerely know how much I appreciate the compassion and the support that you provide constituents in Cariboo North. Does Budget 2022 meet the needs of the constituents of Cariboo North? Has the NDP government met their promise to you that under their government that they're going to make your lives more affordable? Have they delivered on the housing affordability and availability in Cariboo North? Under the NDP government, do you feel that your healthcare services have increased? Under the NDP, have services for seniors improved in Cariboo North? Are we supporting and meeting the needs of individuals in Cariboo North with mental health and addiction? Do you or a loved one or a family member with disability, do you feel that your service levels have increased under the NDP? Under the NDP government, do you feel safer? Do you feel our community is safer? Are you a forestry worker, and do you feel that the government really has your back? Do we see in this budget the much-needed investments following the 2017-2018 wildfire season in Caribou North, the climate adaptation that they continue to talk about year after year, and then we see the significant impacts in communities like Lytton, the incredible flooding that has happened, and yet we hear year after year that this government has these grandiose plans. They'll go out and consult, but let's see some real action. Where's the Caribou Recovery Road projects? Couldn't find that in the budget. So at the same time that this budget is being introduced in this House, at the same time when 700 workers from across this province have just received some pretty devastating news, at the same time as we are debating and going through this budget, there's another process that's happening. And I heard member from Saanich North and the North Islands talk about the need in this House for democracy and the very important real need for our voices of our constituents to be heard here in this legislature. Well, there's another very real process that is happening across British Columbia that could have a very significant impact of people living in rural BC. And we're paying close attention because, quite frankly, the process that is taking place could potentially redraw British Columbia's electoral map. And there is major concern in northern British Columbia that our representation, our northern voices, our ability to ensure that government understands what is north of Hope could be greatly impacted. And we have great reason to be concerned when just moments ago we hear a Minister of Forest talks about how everything is rosy, when in the same breath a half an hour earlier, 700 workers just received some very, very difficult news. We feel that this government does not understand what is happening north of Hope. We feel that in rural British Columbia, this government, this budget does not reflect the very real needs of people living in communities across this province. It is a government that continues to talk about equality for all and universal care, and yet we all know because we live it, that equality that the NDP talk about that they're delivering for people in our communities, whether it's healthcare, whether it's training, we just don't see. We just don't see the same level of access to these services in our communities. So, Madam Speaker, this is the sixth budget presented by the NDP government, and a review of the election promises of the NDP of 2017 and 2020 clearly highlights some significant failures to British Columbians. We've heard in this House the talk about gas prices in British Columbia are now the highest in North America. And if you live in a riding like Caribou North, you need to fundamentally understand the need of transportation to do the type of work necessary to drive this amazing province of British Columbia. So now we look at housing prices at our all-time high, talk about a lack of action on that side. Grocery prices are way up, and even rents. So let's review the housing. So the NDP government promised 5 years ago that they would introduce a rental supplement of $400 to all renters. That was in their first 2017 election promise. They scaled it back a little bit in the next, their next promise, but that's never been any of these six budgets. They're now in their second term. They have a majority government, and I guess, I'm just disappointed that they're not addressing the pressures that families are facing. If you're living in Quesnel, if you're living in Wells, Horsefly, Macleese Lake, are you able to find affordable housing? Are you able to find housing? Under the NDP, they talk about all of this great stuff that they're doing on affordable housing and making life more affordable for you, but do you feel that? Do you feel that in Caribou North? You know, one of the significant challenges that we have with the recruitment of professionals to the Caribou is the fact that we really do not have access to housing that the NDP promised to deliver to British Columbians. The affordable housing units that have been delivered to Caribou North, and I would remind members of the government, whether it's the Lions Senior Facility to Keth Housing, even the Bridges Housing, all of those projects were developed, funded, and secured under the BC Liberals. The NDP like to take credit for those numbers, and it's part of the, you know, what did they promise? 114,000 housing units that they're going to be delivered, and to date they delivered 5,269 housing units. And I think if we were to dig deeper into those numbers, so many of those housing units, like the ones I just announced in the community of, you know, of Caribou North, were actually delivered, and the financial pieces were put in place under the BC Liberals. So what have we actually seen developed and built under the NDP? If you're a first-time home buyer, do you feel that you will have the ability to own your own home? Just look at the housing supply. What is the NDP doing to encourage this? So under the NDP, you've got 25% of all the costs of every new home purchased by British Columbia here in British Columbia, 25% of those costs are taxes. It's the property transfer tax, it's the community amenity contributions, the development cost charges, the provincial sales tax, GST, and the list goes on. And what our leader, Kevin Falcon, wants to make very clear is that under the BC Liberals, we want to look through the lens of a first-time buyer because we want to make sure that our young people have a reasonable, realistic prospect of buying their own homes one day. The NDP have failed. They have failed to set forth a vision for young people in this province of British Columbia, and that's why I'm incredibly proud of what our leader has stood up to say moving forward for young people. So all they've done is add more costs and more taxes to housing, and that does not make housing cheaper, it makes it more expensive. And it's having a terrible impact on families that are just trying to get into the housing market. Now let's look at the cost of heating your home. And I know I've heard from many constituents in Caribou North on the significant increase of heating your home that you've seen on your bills. It's the sticker shock. I cannot believe the rising costs, and it's taxes, and it's all of these other layers that the NDP have cumulatively put on our bills that are making it far less affordable. So now let's look at putting gas in your car. Anyone who's filled up at the tanks recently in Caribou North certainly have seen, you know, how those prices are. I believe the Premier had made that promise that he was going to make sure that gas prices would be far more affordable, and he was going to tackle that, just like he was going to go down and get a good softwood lumber deal as his first order of business, and we saw how that worked out. So what was the response from the Premier to the increase in tax when we raised, what are you going to do about the increase in gas prices? You know what he said? Why don't you take transit? I think people should take transit. Well, news to the Premier, if you're living in Horsefly or Likely or Kersley, or I could go through so many lists of areas of Caribou North, we do not have access to transit. We would like it, but it's just not something that the government has delivered, and it's unrealistic. So that is why we say there is such a strong disconnect from this government and this Premier. That when they say they're standing up for all British Columbians, and they know and they have their backs, and then they tell us to go take transit, maybe tell that to the 700 workers that just got some really difficult news. Maybe they could take transit if they had it in their communities. And so how about the NDP adding a tax on the purchase of a used vehicle? So think about that young person. And, you know, all of us have those young people in our family who get to purchase their first used car, and they're so excited, and they save for so long to get that first vehicle. I remember my first vehicle. It was a Chev Citation. Maybe to the, you know, to my good colleague from Abbotsford West, you know, I've maybe updated from my Chev Citation, and, you know, I have a 2008 Jeep Compass now. That's pretty exciting. But for, you know, for people who are buying that first car.
A car from this century.
A car from this century. you know, so that they can go out and get a job, and so that they can go out and save money for their schooling. And for all of those reasons, this government has decided they're going to tax that young person who's just trying to buy their first car. You know, like, is that really making life more affordable? Is that really where you need to go to get the revenue for this budget? Do you really have to go to young people who, you know, when we talk about sustainability and we talk about affordability, a lot of young people are now turning to the marketplace. So whether they're buying clothes on the marketplace or whether it's on Facebook, or there's so many things, and it's not just young people. Look, frankly, people are looking at ways that they can help save money in these difficult times. And so the NDP, what are they going to do? They're going to tax that as well. So we got young people's back, but we're going to tax you on your cards, and we're going to tax you on any chance that you're trying to maybe buy something on Facebook through a marketplace or any of those other items, because the government just, you know, that's the government's message on making your life more affordable, and quite frankly, I think it's doing quite the opposite. And we heard earlier today that 53% of British Columbians are $200 or less away from insolvency. So again, I go back to those 700 workers that just got really difficult news today. So think of that family, and you're looking at $200 or less away from insolvency, and you've just found out that you're going down to temporarily to a reduced work week. And you heard the Minister of Finance, or Ministry of Forest earlier get up and say that she's got your back and she'll be there for you. I hope she's going to help make your mortgage. Hope she's going to help actually pay some of those expenses that you have, because they're still coming in. I hope this government understands that when they say that they're there for people and they're going to line all these things up, that people have real costs and they're worried. So let's turn a little bit now to our healthcare system. And like so many people have talked about in this House, is how grateful we are for all of the incredible healthcare workers across the province of British Columbia. Today is BC Seniors Day and Caregiving Day, and like so many members, had the privilege of meeting some extraordinary individuals last night at the BC Caregivers Awards. But I think about the people in Caribou North. I think about the nurses that I've talked to at GR Baker Hospital. And I think of the calls I've taken from the care aide at Dunroven. I think of the doctors I've talked to and just the stress that they're feeling. You know, we heard earlier that 900,000 British Columbians don't have access to a family doctor. And I think of the pressure of the people that I care about, those doctors that are doing everything within their power to make sure that they're supporting our communities, but the pressure that they're feeling. And I wonder, and I go through the pages of the budget, and I wonder where the healthcare human resource sector strategy is. We keep hearing that that announcement is coming. And every week that goes by, the frailty of our healthcare system gets stretched. And I wonder what the breaking point will be. I wonder what the breaking point will be for those hard-working healthcare workers that are putting their hearts and souls and compassion into caring for the people of Caribou North. And I know that they're wondering in this budget, where's the relief for them? And how about our seniors? Where was the money that was promised for the business plan for the added long-term beds in Quesnel? I looked through the budget and I can't find it. If it's there, that is extraordinary news. And how about the support for home care? If you're a senior on a fixed income, and let us not forget that so many of our seniors were small business owners, farmers, ranchers like mine, that do not have the government pension plans that a lot of us have access to and are privileged to have. Think of the cost of their medication. You know, during the heat dome, I reached out to many of the seniors living in Caribou North, many living in BC housing facilities that didn't have air conditioning, and in smaller communities, we couldn't even find fans. And I looked in this budget and I tried to find where the government's priorities in supporting our communities in rural British Columbia. Where are those simple things? Where's that capital investment in things like an air conditioner for a senior, so that if we have another climate heat emergency, that they're not dealing with the devastating consequences? Think about end-of-life care in British Columbia. Under the NDP, why do people have to pay a daily fee when they're deemed end of life? We talk about this universal free healthcare system except when you're palliative or ALC. And at that moment when you are at end of life, to have that conversation with family members, well, we're now going to start charging you a daily fee, it's not good enough. In a province and in a country like ours, it's not good enough. And I wanted to see that in this budget. I wanted to see the support for hospice care. And this government is not addressing it. I'm deeply concerned about the increase in violence and sexualized violence in our communities and our post-secondary institutions, and what are the governments doing to responding to the requests from student organizations to address these very serious concerns? If you live in the Caribou today, do you feel safer? Just today, I received a letter from the Quesnel Downtown Association, and I want to read it into record. In the last few years, we as business community have seen an increase in theft, shoplifting, vandalism, and general bad behavior in and around our business. We as a business community have been proactive in installing better video surveillance, reporting practices, and coordinated action as a business group. Though we are able to identify the individuals responsible, we are not seeing the court system pursuing charges and punishment. It has become our understanding that since the crimes are valued at under $5,000, Crown prosecutors are reluctant to pursue charges. As small businesses operating in an already difficult economic climate, this is very disheartening. With profit margins around 2 to 4%, a theft of a $100 item requires us to sell up to $5,000 just to regain our loss. We feel helpless, as even though we are doing all the right things to document, report, and submit evidence, the criminals are going unpunished, and there is no effective deterrent. Where in this budget is there an increase to the resources to the Crown to prosecute prolific offenders? Where is it? How is the NDP making communities safer? I want to take a quick moment to talk about a few things around the impact that communities like Caribou North have felt when it comes to the significant wildfires that we experienced in 2017 and 2018, and the real-life consequences that we live with every day. Last year, via Zoom, at the very same time, I urged all members to pay attention to spring freshets. I requested to all members to understand the very real consequences that we are experiencing on the ground in our communities. I consider the impacts of the fires that we've seen this year, and I consider the flooding that we've seen, and I've heard words from the Minister of Forests, but again, I've gone through the budget and I just don't see the very real necessary investments that are going to be required to help us through another difficult spring freshet. You know, I've talked a lot in this House about the need for upgrading culverts, and people often say, Corley, like culverts, what's that? I can't use my name, sorry. Member from Caribou North, what is a culvert going to actually do to help your community with your road network and your infrastructure network? Well, after fires, our culvert and our infrastructure system changes. And if you do not make those investments, you'll see hundreds of roads get destroyed. Last year we had, I think, over 150 roads that were impacted by spring freshet. The year before was equally as bad, if not worse. Year after year, when we're talking about hundreds of roads in our communities that are being impacted, and last year, almost every community in the region of Cariboo North were almost cut off. That is significant. And so I look in this budget for the types of investments that I know under the line items which are necessary to put that investment into our communities. I looked at the side road rehabilitative program in the Ministry of Transportation. That was a critical budgetary item when we were in government to make sure that we were taking care of side roads and we were making the types of investments so that we could ensure that our roads would be stable come freshet. And lo and behold, the budget has been reduced. At a time when members who've been impacted by fires this year and floods know that we are going to have an extraordinarily difficult spring freshet, we are seeing reductions in the very items in budget that are going to help resolve and be proactive in those areas. I'm deeply concerned about spring freshet, and I'm deeply concerned about the actions that are being taken by this government. And I'm also curious to know, and I certainly didn't see it in the budget, but I hope it's there because I've heard this government talk on multiple occasions how they're there for the people and that when these emergencies happen that they'll be there for the people. Well, I'm looking specifically where the Cariboo Recovery Projects for Transportation is. I'm looking for the funding for the Quesnel-Hickson Road, Highway 97 at Cottonwood. I'm looking in this budget for the funding for the Blackwater Road at Knickerbocker. I'm looking in this budget for the funding of Quesnel Hydraulic Road. I'm looking in this budget for Highway 20 at Hodgkin Dog Creek. I'm looking in this budget for Kersley Dale Lake Landing Road. I'm looking in this budget for Bastion Road at Bastion Hill. I'm looking in this budget for Durrell Road, Highway 97 at Coosan. And I'm looking for money for Soda Creek McAllister Road, and I'm hoping that the Ministry of Transportation is here. He's heard our requests. We're hoping that the Cariboo Road Recovery Project is moving forward and that money will be available to people who have been so critically impacted in Cariboo North. I hope this government delivers on their promises. And finally, as I close out my remarks, and I've got probably another 20, 30 pages, I always do, I want to end my remarks again to talk about our forest community and our workers and the type of supports and programs that are necessary for those 700 people that just have received some very difficult news. Because it's not just the workers, it's the people that are working actually out in the bush. It's the logging contractor. It's that 30-year-old that just bought $1 million piece of equipment. It's the processor. And the message that this government has repeatedly stood up and said that we'll be here for workers and contractors, and I'm just trying to clearly understand what that support will be. Because telling a 30-year-old that you can bridge to retirement is not a strategy. And saying that you will retrain somebody, when I've talked to my local college and we know that these impacts are very real because they're happening right now in our community, and we don't actually see the investment and the training seats in our community, in our college, for all of the workers that are going to be impacted, it makes us ask the question, where is the training programs that the minister has talked about? Where are the supports for the forest worker? What does that 30-year-old do that now has to come up with a mortgage and a payment on their equipment? What are they going to do? And layer on all of the affordability challenges that they're now faced with. Do you know what the gas bill is for a logging truck is, Madam Speaker, or a processor? Like, we are talking double-digit numbers. It's a significant cost. And you start looking at the payments and, under this government, under this budget, life is not more affordable. So in my final moments, here's my message to Cariboo North. I want you to understand what this government is doing. I want you to understand that they just do not understand rural British Columbia. If you live in the North, I want you to understand that your voices could be disenfranchised by this government. I want you to pay attention to the Electoral Boundary Commission, and I want you to stand up, and I want you to go, and I want you to present. I want you to ask this government, and I want you to make your voices heard, that it is important that this legislature, that this chamber understands the very real needs of people living in our communities. Because if you don't stand up, we're going to lose that opportunity to sit in this House, to sit in this legislature. And you will see that bubble, that isolated disconnect with rural British Columbia just get bigger and bigger. We have a great geographic, diverse province in British Columbia. The Electoral Boundary Commission is going out today to talk to you in your communities about your representation. And I just kindly ask you, for all voices in rural British Columbia, please show up and let them know that they can't take our voices away, they can't silence us, and that we matter to the province of British Columbia.
Thank you, Member.